All right, welcome or welcome back to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. Today I have Brian Gilbert. He's an athlete I've been training for, I don't know, a year and a half now, and he recently got a sub 24 hour at Rocky Raccoon, but we'll get to that in a second. Brian, how about you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about yourself?
Well, hello. Thanks, Will. Brian Gilbert. Yeah, like you said, I guess we've been doing this for about a year and a half. I got into running really only a couple of years ago. I met you pretty quickly after I realized how bad I was at it. So that worked out really well.
I'm glad.
Um, Never really had a background in it, but certainly have become interested in the ultras in the last year specifically. And then my Rocky was my second 100. So we had dyno and didn't go as well, but we had a really good finish at Rocky despite pretty bad conditions that day.
Yeah, man, the conditions looked apocalyptic, honestly, if we're gonna be real. Like,
That's fair. It was one of those really weird situations where, in the weeks leading up to the race, the weather was supposed to be really good. We've had a couple of races where I had really bad weather, like unexpectedly bad weather. So I was kind of excited that finally it looked like it was going to be okay. And then like 10 days out from the race, it starts raining and it just doesn't stop. It just doesn't stop. And I think they got like 20 inches of rain around Huntsville in those
that's
2 weeks before the race.
oh, that's an insane amount of water. Um, yeah, I'm honestly surprised they didn't like stop the race, if I'm going to be real. So,
Well, I kind of wondered because we saw the videos on Facebook ahead of time and like the river running over the trail and everything, and it's like, hey, is this going to happen? And then of course the race puts out an email saying that we've canceled this race once in like 20 years or something, like we're going to run it. And I was like, all right,
okay.
so that's
Yeah.
some last minute plan adjustments. Of
Yeah, I
course,
mean, on
it
my
was
end, like I used to play sports where they would cancel fields for rain because you didn't want to ruin it. And
right.
from here, like I know it kind of depends on, land rights and all this stuff of like whether they're gonna just completely obliterate a trail. And I have a feeling after seeing the photos and the videos that it was like, well, the trail's fucked anyway, so we might as well run it. Like that's the best explanation I have. Like, yeah.
Pretty much, you got what there was like nearly 300 runners, running 5 laps. So
Yeah.
yeah, you got 1,500 feet going over the same trail and all the rain. So it definitely got progressively worse as the day went on.
Yeah. So like what was that like? How was the course? How was the race? Did you get any vibe of what it would have been like without 6 inches of standing water for miles on end? Like, yeah, tell me
Right.
about it.
So, the night before the race, it was going to rain. Of course, the morning of the race, it was probably going to be raining at the start line of the race. So, obviously, foot care and everything kind of became my big deal, and I kind of scrapped some of my plans and got some other stuff and all that. When I started the race, I really didn't know what the course was going to look like. We had, I knew it was going to be wet, but I really didn't know how wet. But probably in the first 200 yards, I stepped in ankle deep mud. And just like totally went over the top of my shoe and everything. And at that point, you're just like, well, screw it. Like there's no hope of remaining even somewhat dry. And then, once you get up to the very first aid station, there's a literal river across the road. I mean, like across the trail. It's knee deep and flowing like fast. And, everybody's just kind of hobbling through it. And you got to cross it twice, go into the aid station and cross it again to go out of this aid station. And that was like in the first 4 miles. So, at that point, you're completely soaked. Everything you own is wet. It's raining. It's just time to put up or shut up.
Yeah.
Um, I think the course it would be a really pretty place to run on a pretty day.
Yeah.
There's lots of trails and they have the boardwalks over the water and everything else. And I mean, it was well marked and well done. I think it would be a really fast course on a good day.
Yeah, I mean, this course kind of speaks to that. I think Ian Sharman has the record at like 12 hours and change or something.
Oh
I don't
yeah.
know, like it's wild. And then past few years, it's been like 14 and change for the finisher. And then this year it was like 17. So it's just like,
Yeah, that 3 hour premium on top.
yeah, it doesn't speak to necessarily the best conditions. So you mentioned foot care. What did you do for some of this? And I realized to some degree it's like what can you do? But
Right.
what did you do to at least like manage as best as you could?
So, I mean, there was a bunch of things. First of all, I was wearing, the toe socks. I have really good luck with synthetic toe socks. I've been wearing them for a long time. So, what we decided to do is get some of that like run goo. It's like this very thick white product. And I was basically completely coating my feet in that, then putting on my, toe socks and then my shoes and gaiters. And what was happening is there was so much sand, like really fine sand in the mud, that the sand was accumulating in my shoes really
Sure.
badly, and even like inside of my socks, getting through my socks. So every lap, I was just, coming back to the aid station. My wife was crew chiefing me. She had everything laid out, and I would take my socks off, rinse my feet with cold water and to get all the sand off, put more of the run goo on, put socks on, rinse my socks in cold water to get them wet ahead of time because my shoes are already wet and I don't want them to stick anywhere, and then just put them back on and go. Um, Actually worked way better than I thought it would. I mean, I ended up with a couple of blisters on my heels, but nothing catastrophic like I was afraid of. And of course, you kind of figure this out over the race. I'm telling you what I did by the end of the race.
Yeah, that's fair.
At the beginning of the race, you're kind of thinking about it, and I actually stopped twice in the middle of the course to dump sand out of my socks at different times. Like I had so much sand in my socks that my toes were backing out of my toe socks,
Jesus,
just
man.
packed full of sand.
That's insane. Like, I didn't realize it was quite that bad. And I know, like, for anybody thinking, like, yes, gators would be a good idea in a normal circumstance, but when the water is up to your knees, like, there's not a lot you're going to be able to do, right?
Yeah, and I had gaiters. I mean, on
Yeah.
my shoes and everything else. But yeah, it's just coming up and over the sides and everything else. I will say that I think I could have done better with the gaiters. I'm gonna get some better ones. The ones that I had didn't stick to my shoes super well.
I mean, that's a good note, right? So, like, just learn from what we can do. But yeah, I think to some degree, when the water's that high and the sand's that fine, it's basically just like
Yeah.
moisture. So you're gonna end up short of wearing like fishing waders. Like, I'm not sure what else you're gonna do.
No, I think you're just gonna get wet and you're just gonna, it's just gonna be miserable. And I spent I spent a lot of time the night before the race, like mentally preparing for that. Like, you're gonna run with wet feet. You're gonna be wet all day long. It's just gonna suck. It's just part of what we're doing today. Like, get over it. And I think that helps me at least a lot, is just to know that I've thought it through. I know what I'm in for. Like let's not delude ourselves and think that I can keep my feet dry and blister free. Like, you're running 100 miles in the mud. It's gonna be tough.
Yeah, man. And I mean, you looked like you had a little bit of trench foot at the end, but it did look a lot better than I expected it to from talking
Yeah,
midway through it, very
no,
honestly.
not too bad, especially considering the time and everything else. I mean, I had planned to run this race sub 24 in dry conditions. So, we kind of had a plan to come in really close to 24 hours, and with the water and everything else, I was pretty worried about it. So, I'm pretty impressed with how they held up, honestly.
Yeah, me too. So, like, what was the strategy then? I mean, I know what it was going into it, but how did you adapt your like race day strategy considering all the water and stuff?
Well, one thing I think everybody deals with, and me and you have talked about lots, is, you tend to go out fast, right? Everybody tends to go out fast. On this race, I decided that the first lap I was going to run it pretty fast, simply because it was going to be the only lap where the course wasn't torn up. So
Fair.
I knew that going in, like, yeah, I'm going to run the first lap fast. I figure I can make up some time and bank it. I finished the first lap at about an 11-minute mile, I think, the first 20 miles. So that lap was pretty fast, and the course was pretty good at that point. It was a little slick, but it wasn't like ankle deep slog through most of it. So really was just to make time while it was good. And then, after that first lap, I settled into a pretty flat pace until, the last lap, I think. Um, but just to maintain always, keeping my average pace up, shooting for a 14-minute average pace, and just working at the best that I can. Keep my stops really, really short, except for my stops at, the aid station with my wife. I had planned on, 2 or 3 minutes at each aid station, time to really check everything. But I made those stops really, really short, like 30, 45 seconds, just long enough to fill up a water bottle and go, so that I could save that time for back at the race hub where I could take my shoes off and rinse my feet and everything else and have a 5 or 6 minute stop.
I think that's huge for these. I mean, touch a couple points there. Like one is the banking time thing, right? And I think that's super intelligent, especially in the circumstance here. And you and I have talked about this in the past on like hot races too, which we
Yeah,
can get to later. But it's like if you there's always this idea like you can't bank time. And to some degree that's true up to a point, right? And like
right.
probably for a marathon or maybe even a 50K, like you're not going to bank a ton of time. But if it's going to be a 40-degree temperature swing or when the course is completely ruined, then yeah, man, running that first couple hours faster can actually you can bank that because it's when the conditions are better. So that makes a ton of sense. And then if we're looking at the aid station thing, that's something I'm not great at. And you definitely do better than me. Like, what do you do to keep your aid station time so short?
So, well, specifically for this race, I'm running with a bladder with water with just element in it for electrolytes, and then carrying handheld bottles of Tailwind. So my plan at the aid stations, really all I needed to do was fill up those Tailwind bottles. I was doing a complete swap of my hydration system at the race hub with my wife. So I was getting a new bladder. She was putting that in while I was messing with my shoes. So at the aid stations out on the course, all I end up doing is filling up a half-liter bottle. And, I would carry the Tailwind packets, the little individual packets that you can buy. And as I was approaching the aid station before I even got there, I would uncap, I would pour all the powder in the bottle and pack my trash and everything and basically just run up to the aid station holding an empty bottle. And, somebody would get it and fill it and I'd put the cap back on it and go right back out. And that was basically it. Towards the end of the race and at night, I would, run by the table and maybe grab some food, but it's kind of the same thing. I would always just grab two or three things and hold them in my hand and start down the trail and eat while you're moving type deal.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think it's just like all that pre-prep and making it as easy as possible is really where that goes to. So,
It makes a huge difference, on my first ultra that I did, when I would come in into aid stations, we talked about it. Like I was horrible about just forgetting what I was supposed to be doing. Like, you just get in there and you're tired and you're overwhelmed. And
yeah,
I would run in and I might get some water, but I wouldn't, get any fuel or I wouldn't mix my drinks and I would be right back out. And so these last couple of races, I've tried to really organize everything ahead of time and, pack it in quart bags and number the system and everything else so that I kind of have an exact order that's easier to remember when you're brain dead, 50 miles in.
yeah. And that's going to happen almost certainly 50 miles in.
For
So,
sure.
like, so that's rocky. Where did you start in this whole running thing? Like, how did you get into this insane sport where you're trudging through mud for 23 hours?
Well, it's kind of a long story, of course. I was military. Right out of high school, I joined the military back in 2003, and dealt with that through the Iraq War and everything else. I was injured in 2006 and subsequently discharged. And really, for a long time, I was in the VA system. I was not in good health. I'd had multiple back surgeries and everything else. I was popping a lot of pills. I was overweight, really pretty unhealthy for a large portion of time after I left the military. Um, I think eventually I just kind of got to the point where I knew I was doing the wrong thing for me and for my health. Um, me and my wife got pregnant in 2020, and we had a daughter. We knew when my wife got pregnant that she had a congenital heart defect. It was very severe. So we went down to Houston, Texas, and we were down in Houston for all of COVID. Staying in the Ronald McDonald House, dealing with my daughter and her heart condition and everything else, and it was a really bad time for my health.
Yeah.
Um, I just sat around and ate junk food and worried and drank too much and basically every bad thing that you can do. And it was really a miracle that everything worked out that year. But my daughter ended up with a really good result, and kind of when we got home, it was one of those things where I had one of those aha moments, man. Let's just like, this is not going the way that I want it to. My life is not going the way that I want it to. And you've been told by the VA for many, many years that I'm so crippled that I can't do anything. That it was all kind of over for you.
Yeah.
So getting back into it was very difficult. I decided that I was going to lose some weight and get in shape, and I really didn't know how far that I could take that. It's ironic that when I sat down and figured out my plan to get in shape, the number one thing on the list was literally no running. Like I hated running. I was terrible at running when I was in the military. I was terrible about it in high school. Like running was
Uh,
never my thing.
yeah, man, it
But I could,
sucks.
right. It's not fun.
It's hard. I mean, yeah, I like it now, but I hated it forever. Yeah.
But I could ruck, and so that's what I did. I got steel plates and put them in a backpack, and I live on a ranch out in rural West Texas, and I've got a lot of land, and I just started hiking, basically rucking with weight, and gradually getting into shape and losing some weight and everything else. And I sat down and had my very first run, I guess, in 2022 in April. It was the very first time that I ran since I got out of the military. And I just had gotten to the point with the rucking where it was difficult to get a workout in. I had gotten in better shape, everything else, and it was hard to find 2 hours to go out and ruck in the afternoon. So it was like, well, let's try a short run and see how that goes. And I ran 2 miles in like 20 minutes and nearly died. It was pretty awful.
That's right.
But it
I get
was the
that.
start of something, right? And it's funny how you can feel so terrible about something and know that it's not good, but still feel so accomplished. And that little 2 mile run felt
Yeah.
really good, even though it wasn't very impressive. And that was kind of the start of it. My sister was a runner in college, and I started talking to her, and I was really slow, and she was like, "Well, it's okay if you're really slow. You just run far." It doesn't matter how slow you are if you can run further than everybody else. And I was like,
On
"Hey, this
point.
this sounds like my kind of advice."
Yeah.
So she was the one who encouraged me to sign up for a marathon. She was like, "Hey, you're hard-headed as hell, and you can do this. It's just go out there and do it." And I wasn't sure if I could do it or not. I'd been running at that point for, about 4 months pretty regularly. And me and my wife were sitting there talking. We were sitting in the hot tub, and I was like, I'm going to go run a half marathon tomorrow. And if I can do that, then I'll sign up for the marathon. And
Okay.
so I went and ran like a 2.5 hour half the very next day and was like, okay, I can do this, and signed up for a marathon in November of 2022. So that
Yeah.
was kind of how all the running started, I guess. Um, but that marathon went very poorly. Oh my gosh, that went so poorly. I didn't know
Uh,
jack about
how
running. I
far
didn't
out
know
were
jack about
you from
trading.
this when you ran a half in 2.5 hours?
About 4 months.
Okay. I mean, that's actually
Yeah, so
we could argue that that's not
that's not
unreasonable.
terrible. Yeah,
I've helped people do worse, so yeah, that's fair. Okay. Cool.
but I had no training plan. I got on the internet and downloaded one of those like marathon training plans that shows you the progression and everything else,
Yeah.
but no fueling, no hydration, no electrolytes, no nothing. Like I ran my first several training halves without any water or any nutrition at all. Like nothing. I would just go out and run for 3 hours. And of course, you always feel like
Sure.
death at the end of it.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, well, I'm just not in good enough shape.
I
Um,
actually remember my first conversation with you. I was at this old gym where I like just quit working, and it was like between clients. I was kind of pacing around, and you and I were chatting and kind of talked to me about how your marathon went and how your training went. It was like, oh, dude, you just didn't eat enough. Like I'd
yeah,
love to work with you, but very clearly you just didn't eat enough. So like that's the biggest thing. Eat more food and things will go better. And then
right,
if you want to
right,
work
right.
together, great. But that's the big one. Yeah.
That was probably the big one. Yeah. No, so after, I mean, I did finish the marathon. It was bad. It was like just short of 5 hours, I think. But I look like death at the finish line for sure, and my wife is standing there looking at me, and she's got this like squinty eye looking at me, and she's like, no. Like if you're gonna do this, you need to get some help. Like you're gonna kill yourself. I don't trust you.
I I know we all like to, we don't necessarily we always feel like death at the end of the marathon, but like I've seen photos of you after races, and until we like narrowed in your hydration, and we can get into this later in a minute, but like your hydration needs for a very long time were way too high to be reasonable, right? For
Right.
a bunch of reasons. And so like I've seen you finish and you tend to look like death, if we're going to be fair, as do many people. And I just when I met your met your wife, she was like, "Oh, you have no idea. You have no idea how he looked at the end of that first marathon. It was the worst shit I've ever seen." It's like, okay, that puts that into perspective as to why this was a conversation. All right, I
Yes,
get it.
yeah.
Yeah, fair.
It was definitely a conversation. And yeah, that's that's how I met you. So, and after that, man, it was all ultras. I was about to turn 40 and I was like, I'm gonna run some ultras on my 40th birthday or my 40th year. And we started with the Zion 50K and I had always kind of had it in the back of my head, when I first started training for the marathon and you start reading about running, you hear about ultras, and you hear about Western States and all these big races, and you start reading about it. And of course, at the time, I'm like, this is insane. Like, I remember very distinctly thinking, how does this work? Like, do you take naps? Like, what is this? Like, how do you run
Fair.
100 miles? Like, logistically, it just didn't seem like a possible thing. It seems so out there. Um, but I knew that I wanted to see how far I could go. That was the big deal is like, uh, I was getting into shape. My body was feeling better. A lot of the pain and problems that I had, the health problems were all improving. And it was just like this desire to see how far I could push it, and yeah, we went from 50K to 100 miles in that one year. We did 4 races in over like 9 months, I think.
Yeah, it sounds right. And I mean, to be fair, it was a little aggressive is a word for it, but also like you it it was a big part of your life, right? And this is one of the things I tell people with stuff like you have a big background of athleticism, even though it wasn't very recent. Right? Like you were in the military, you
Yeah,
know how to like suffer.
right.
That is so
That I
much
do
of
know how
this
to do.
sport. It is just like, are you willing to suffer long enough to get across the finish line? Um, which was never it has never been a concern with you. Um, and I think that's one of the big things when it comes to scaling that quickly. Like one, it is going to kind of take over your life a little bit. Like it's going to be a ton of training.
For
And
sure.
then two, like if you're willing to just, be very uncomfortable for long periods of time, you tend to be able to do stuff fairly well. And like one of the things that we talked about early were some of those injuries that you got back in like 2006. So the suffering was pretty clear. Like
Right.
what were some of those and like how did you come back from them and like how much did they throw you off and all that stuff?
Oh man, yeah, there was a lot. So in January of 2006, I had a bad parachute jump. I was a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. We were doing a training jump one night. Like a late night jump, uh, high winds. It was one of those jumps that basically everything just went wrong. We were pushing out some howitzers and then the plane makes a circle and then we follow the howitzers down and we were going to shoot a fire mission and a bunch of circumstances led to a really bad exit and a really bad landing. And I don't remember hitting the ground at all. I remember waking up being drugged by my parachute and I had an obviously broken leg. And I got that under control and ended
How
up,
obviously broken.
it wasn't like bone sticking through the skin or anything like that. It was just more like I think I've broken like 20 something bones in my life. I know exactly what it feels like.
Yeah,
So it wasn't like a bad break. It was just, I knew that it was broken.
yeah, that's fair.
I ended up crewing that mission for like 6 hours because you could sit down. The gunner gets to sit down. So I was sitting down and all the soldiers were running around loading the howitzer and everything around me. And I was just kind of sitting there on the seat. But at the end of that, we had a march, a 20K ruck march out. And I was like, hey, there's no way. Like, I'll sit here and shoot the fire mission, but I ain't rucking 20 miles. So, that was kind of what started all this. And, my back was very, very sore after that jump, but I had a broken leg. And that was like kind of the focus and everything else. Got in a cast and a boot and crutches and all that stuff. Uh, and started having headaches and never really thought a lot about it. 6 weeks later, my boot came off and I went for a run and had an aneurysm. Started bleeding into my brain. And what had happened was I had what they call an AVM in my spine. It was just like some veins and arteries that had gotten all screwed up and grew together and made a bubble. And when my blood pressure got high, it started leaking blood into my spinal fluid, which, obviously gives you a horrible headache and everything else. And the next 9 months I spent in the hospital on and off while they were trying to diagnose it. It was very difficult to diagnose. They couldn't figure out where it was bleeding for a long time. I ended up with a spinal fusion, a laminectomy, and open cord surgery, really just kind of a mess, and had my cervical spine fused. And of course, at that point, the army was pretty much done with me. They were like, "Yeah, we'll let you go." It took them about 30 days to process me out after I got out of the hospital.
Mm.
So that was kind of the big thing, and being thrown into the VA system and everything else. I had a lot of chronic migraines and neck pain and back pain and muscle spasms, and just there was a lot of issues after the surgery. They ended up having to go in multiple times, and they damaged a lot of tissue and everything else. So that was pretty tough. And the VA, of course, is really, really quick to load you up on every pill that they can think of. So they'll, put you on a bunch of painkillers and muscle relaxers and, tell you you're fine, but obviously you're not.
Yeah.
But that went around, and I've had so many different things like that. I had a very bad motorcycle wreck in 2014. I had an incident at the gun range in 2011 where I ended up with a bullet in my neck and my shoulder and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I've
Hmm.
had a lot of trauma stuff over my life. So
Yeah.
just getting used to that, I think, has in a way prepared me for ultra running, because I think anybody who deals with chronic pain for a long time, understands suffering for 20
Yeah.
hours. Doesn't sound that bad, it's just one or 2 days versus, weeks and weeks and weeks. So
Yeah.
I think it provides some mental toughness for sure, but it also gave me a lot of strategies to deal with, the mental challenge of running, because I'd had to figure out how to deal with just the mental challenge of day-to-day life for so long.
Yeah. I had someone else tell me that like she really struggled with chronic pain and she liked running because it was a pain that she could control.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like a pain you can understand. Like I know
Yeah.
why it's happening and I know how to make it stop. All I got to do is stop running.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a real thing. But yeah, man. And thanks for sharing all that. But it's that is the kind of thing where I don't know. Um, Life prepares you for ultra running and vice versa. And I think like the general ability to just suffer and do hard stuff, like doing hard stuff makes other hard stuff easier because you just like deal with strategies or find strategies to deal with it.
For sure. I mean, I think that's a big part of it. And I sit around and I think, did living with chronic pain teach me about ultra running, or did ultra running teach me about living with chronic pain? And I think it kind of goes both ways. Like, lessons from one apply to the other in a lot of different ways.
Man, so like fast forward back a little bit to like where you're getting back past from that marathon, like moving towards Zion and everything. Like, where did some of those on your end, like I knew what we were doing, but like where would some of those shifts feel for you? Like what were some focuses that you really needed to make early that helped make some of this training better? Like what made some of those early shifts that went from a fairly poor marathon to like running
Yeah.
100 miles in under 24 hours.
Well, I think, like you said, the first thing that we had to get figured in was my hydration and nutrition. I had a really high sweat rate. I didn't know what a sweat rate was when I met you. Never even contemplated
Yeah,
this.
fair.
Um, but when we started doing the testing, I was obviously underhydrating by a horrible amount. And I'm a very salty sweater, and so there's an electrolyte problem. And I had never run while I had, taken in food. like
Mm.
any real food other than like Tailwind or something like that. I had never had a gel or any actual food. I always ran fasted. Of course, when I was in the military, we always ran fasted because you would get up first thing and do PT, and then you would go eat breakfast afterwards. So it was just kind of my normal way to do things. And, fasted 45-minute run is just fine.
Yeah.
Fasted 3.5 hour run is not fine.
Yeah.
So
Let's see how that goes. Yeah.
I think really when I started working with you, the big things that I learned right off the bat were how much higher my hydration and nutrition needs were than I assumed that they were.
Mm.
And I just made a lot of assumptions. And you make a lot of assumptions maybe based on what you see other runners do or what you see other people do. And really taking the time to do the testing that me and you did and sit down and figure all that stuff out, I think really took me it helped me a whole lot. I think my fitness was better than I thought it was when I ran the marathon. That it was,
Yeah.
the result was so poor because of my hydration and nutrition, and just fixing that showed me that I was in better shape than I thought I was. I just needed to take care of myself while I was running.
Yeah. And to be fair to you, like a couple things. And then yeah, you were absolutely fitter than you thought you were. And two, you had a sweat rate that was irreparable. It's really a way to put that, right? And like some things have come that have changed that around and whatever. We can get into that because you know
Yeah,
better than me, honestly. But like to put this in framing for people at the time, you were sweating about 3 liters of an hour in the summer, which your stomach just can't intake that much fluid. Um, like an IV can barely deliver you that much fluid in the heat while running around, right? So like you're just screwed. There's
right.
really no way around it. You were the only person where like everybody wants to get into these weird hydration hacks where it's like, how much like should we crank salt? Should we do this? Should we hyperhydrate? Should we run the like scratch passion fruit product or whatever? Should we play with like glycerol and all these things? And you were the only person I've ever had that I have ever done any of that with. It's because it's very real. If you have a 3 liter an hour sweat rate, and at the upper end, your stomach can maybe take in 1.5 liters an hour,
Right.
you're gonna get dehydrated. And
For
this is
sure.
why like people who have really high sweat rates like are going to struggle a little bit. Like I don't know exactly. We need to retest yours for this summer, so I'm not sure where you are. But at the time, like if you had told me you wanted to run Badwater, I told you you would die. Like there's literally no way to keep you hydrated enough to do
Right.
something like that, right? So like, and again, that has come down quite a bit. So, like, what has caused that for you? Just to think, just so everybody doesn't think this is like a magical thing you can adjust. Because, like, some people are just stuck with that and it sucks. Like, it's a bell curve and you
Right.
might be at the like super outset. But for you, like, what has made that better?
Well, I mean, we had a lot of strategies that we tried that helped a lot. I think the preloading where I would get up and drink a whole lot of salt water, like elements that were really highly concentrated, before an hour and a half or so before my runs and stuff like that. All those things helped, but they didn't change the sweat rate. When I started really digging into it, and this kind of jumps ahead a little bit, but in the middle of that summer in 2022, was or in 2023 was kind of when I figured out that the medicine that I was taking was playing a big part of that. I had scaled back a lot on all the crap that the VA was pushing towards me, but I was still taking, some pain medication and some muscle relaxers and stuff like that on occasion. And regularly in the evenings. And I think that definitely contributed to my higher sweat rate. Once I started dialing that stuff back, and we talked about it, and I made a big effort to just totally get off all that stuff, and I did that summer. And we saw my sweat rate change quite a bit, just from getting off the medication. And I think that was a big part of it. But I mean, it's still high. I mean, we're still looking at probably 1.5 liters to 175 during
Yeah.
the summer. So I mean, it made a difference, but yeah, I think I'm always going to have maybe a little bit higher than normal.
100%, man. I mean, I agree with that. And I will say, like, yeah, if you're on medications that you need, like you may struggle and you might not be able to trade them. Maybe you're able to change that. That's one thing. Like, I'm not a doctor, right? Like, I didn't make those recommendations.
No,
But
for
that
sure.
said, yeah,
And
you're
I'm not a
still
doctor either.
like
Yeah.
at the upper end of like what we would consider doable. So yeah, I do expect there'll be some difficulties this year as we go into some mountain races, but it's at least like reasonable in some way.
Yeah, I think, just understanding it and, like Paris. Paris, where I ran 100K in Paris, Texas, and I think the heat index was like 106 that day.
It wasn't
Um,
great.
yeah, it wasn't great. And,
It also
at
was
that,
supposed to be better, and then it wasn't, which was real
yeah,
shit.
it
Yeah,
was supposed to be a lot better. But that was a good example because that at that point I was off all the medication and everything else. But still had about a 2 liter an hour sweat rate going into that race. That 108 degree, it was instructive because I did hit that point where I couldn't hold any more water. I was taking in the water and it was just, sloshing in your stomach and everything else. And you had to really get creative about giving your body some time and everything else to get all that liquid in. And it was definitely a challenge.
yeah, for sure, man. And you and I were also running some. I said like we ran some of these things like glycerol, right? Which
Yes.
like is super durable, but like there's not an exact prescription for it. Like there's a starting point, which is where we
Hmm.
went, but like you gotta be willing to experiment when you're kind of out off the edge of a bell curve somewhere. Like it's like
Yeah.
here, try this, and then let's see what happens. And then it goes badly, and then
And then
you
you try something
you
else.
make a minor tweak to it and try it again.
Right.
When you are playing with things like that, like it fucks up your digestive tract, if we're gonna be honest. So like
Oh
you got to
yeah.
be ready to like have some like find a bathroom break on your run and mess with glycerol because at some point it's going to probably run through you and
Yep.
you got to be willing to have a couple rough weeks in order to like have a good couple months.
Yeah, you gotta go through the trouble to figure out what works. And it definitely, it was a little rough on my stomach, but not terrible.
Mhm.
Anytime you do something like that, it feels really weird to mix up a bunch of chemicals in a shaker and drink it, and it tastes really weird and everything
Yeah.
else. But it was definitely something that helped, I think,
Yeah.
beneficial. And regardless, I mean, I think it's still a tool in the toolkit for this summer if we have a hot race or something
Yeah.
like that. I mean, uh, it is amazing to me how quickly our bodies can figure things out if we'll give it a chance. The first time I drank that stuff, I was immediately sick. And, you know,
Fair.
we diluted a little bit and I tried it again and I was okay, but I was still a little sick. And, over the next couple of weeks, we got to the point where I could just get up in the morning and slam a liter of it and go run and be fine. I think you can work that stuff in. You just got to be willing to suffer a little bit along the way.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's just like what the trade-off is. But I mean, substances like that they work. It was banned by WADA for a reason for a while. It's not anymore, but like we know it works for that. It was banned because they thought it helped obfuscate like testing for testosterone. That's why. Because
Ah,
it
ah.
dilutes your pee so much that like that's why.
Mm.
But it absolutely messes with your hydration or it wouldn't have been on that list. But that said, like it can help if you need it. And I wouldn't recommend it to most people though, because it's a giant pain in the ass that you probably don't need. You probably just need to drink the right amount of fluid.
Yeah, yeah.
So on the like subject of the difficulties that come along, like you also did not have the smoothest year when it came to training. Um,
Yeah, we had
the
some training things.
yeah, so like cellulitis and rattlesnakes were both pretty good ones on there.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did those come up?
So I got a bout of cellulitis after Paris. So the Paris, Texas 100K, that was that very hot race. It's a road race. I don't know why we decided to do a road race, but I did. Um, and it was ridiculously hot that day, obviously. When I got done from the race, I really felt okay. That next morning I woke up and like my whole right leg was like swollen, like completely like not healthy looking swollen. And by that afternoon, I was in so much pain that we decided to go to the ER
Yeah.
there in Paris. We hadn't even left.
And I'm going to
And
insert anything for coaches here. You sent me a photo in the morning, like what's going on? And I was like, you should go to a doctor because this is, it, I have no guesses. And this is probably out of my scope. so you should go to the doctor. I swear that was. Yeah.
Right. Well, we were kind of afraid it was like some kind of a blood clot thing because the
Oh yeah, I
veins
was
in
worried
my
you had an
legs
edema.
were,
I was worried you had
yeah,
what was that? An embolism.
yeah,
Because
an
the
embolism or
pain you were
something.
talking about too, and this is knowing you, where you're like, this hurts as bad as anything I felt in a while. I was like, you should definitely go to a doctor. I think you're gonna have a heart attack.
Right. So I went to the ER and walked in there and, told them that I had run the race. And, of course, you always get those looks in the hospital like, you did what? Like, okay. And this doctor comes in and takes one look at it and he's like, "You've got cellulitis." And I was like, "Are you sure? Because I just ran a really long race and everything else. And like, I don't think I have an infection. Like, I think I injured this." And he was like, "Nope, you've got cellulitis." And they did some testing. They did an ultrasound to check for blood clots and everything, and it was all fine. And put me on a crap ton of antibiotics. And that turned into like a 3 week thing where we thought it went away, and then it kind of came back, and had to go back on antibiotics. It was extremely painful and really swollen, but I mean, not debilitating in the long term. Just kind of a bad luck thing.
Yeah.
Um, we decided later, I live on a ranch. We have animals and everything else around, and it's not inconceivable that somebody who's walking around with blisters on their feet all the time in a ranch can get, an infection in their foot. It makes total sense. So obviously we've been much more careful since then.
It happens, man. And I will say, like, I know people have gotten into the gym from like a dirty sauna, right?
Yeah.
Like it sucks. I'm not, but it's a real thing. Like these things happen. They just
Right.
unfortunately always happen at the worst possible time. But they
Right,
tend to
right.
happen. Yeah, for sure.
And then, then right before dinosaur, we had the rattlesnake. So that was what, 11 days out from my first 100-mile race. I worked that day and I came home from work. It was like 4 p.m. and I was going to get like a short, 4 or 5 mile run in, threw on my shoes as soon as I got home, went out running, and like seriously, a third of a mile from the house, I'm running up a little hill and I feel something and I look down mid stride and there is a freaking rattlesnake attached to the side of my shoe, like while I'm running. And I'm like, oh shit, try to kick it off and run over there and look. And it's like this 13-inch, like really short baby diamondback rattlesnake, Western diamondback rattlesnake. And I was just like, crap. And I killed the snake and was just initially I just started running and I killed the snake and I started running and then I got thinking about it and I was like, did that get me? Like it didn't hurt, but his mouth was all the way on the side of my foot and I literally picked him up and I was like, I don't know. And I called my wife on my cell phone and was like, "Babe, I think I might have gotten hit by a rattlesnake. I'm just going to run back to the house and let's look at my shoe or look at my foot and see what it looks like." And of course, the wife was like, Jacqueline is just in full blown panic. She's like, "Get back here right now. Like, I need to come get you." And I'm like, "No, I'm only a mile from the house." And I finished the loop and came back to the house and took my shoe off. And, of course, as soon as you take your shoe off, I see the two holes. Like, there's two little holes in the side of my foot. And I'm just like, crap. 11 days before my first 100 miler, like 5 o'clock in the evening, my daughter and my wife are there. And of course, my wife freaks out. She calls the hospital. And they're like, "Well, we really can't get an ambulance to you. Can you drive to Crosbyton?" We live very remotely. So we drove about 45 minutes to Crosbyton, Texas, and just pulled up in a parking lot. And I got out of my truck and got into the ambulance, and they took me to the hospital in Lubbock. So long story short, ended up being very, very lucky. The bite didn't penetrate. I didn't get venom underneath my skin. So like all the venom from the snake was injected in between my shoe and my foot. And the fangs broke the skin, but didn't actually inject anything. So like I had that venom sitting on the top of my skin. So it kind of made like this big rash on the top of my foot. That it had everybody kind of worried and all that, but there was nothing injected. And honestly, I really just sat in the ER overnight and looked at it and was okay. And 2 days later, it was back to running, and we ran dinosaur or my 100 miler, I guess, 11 days after that, and we're able to finish the race. So I mean, ended up with a pretty good result.
Like, man, you just have the best worst luck is really where I am with you half the time. It's just I can't growing up in the Southwest, like this is one of those things where I've never heard of this happening to anybody, where they actually like they you get bites. You get bites from snakes that are not envenomated, right? So like you
Right,
they don't actually inject you. I've never heard like that doesn't one, it almost never happens with baby snakes. They almost always through the venom because they're too small.
right.
And two, to have your shoe basically be like perfectly thick enough to where it didn't get to your bloodstream is insane. So yeah, I mean, you sent me a photo of like two holes in your foot and a snake, and I was like, please tell me this isn't what I'm looking at. Like I just first thought
I,
in my head was just like, you're you're so far away from a hospital. Like, are you alive? Like, very seriously, I'm very concerned for your well-being. And you're like, yeah, we're on the way. I was like, oh God, Jesus Christ, that's gonna be a time. Because yeah,
yeah.
man, uh, it's one of those things you're very aware of here, growing up and surrounded by snakes. Like,
For sure. Yeah, I mean, we kill a bunch of them on the ranch every year, but
sure, when you have dogs
it's
around, there's things like it's a thing. I hear
oh
you.
yeah, yeah. I get chickens and animals and everything else, and yeah, the snakes hang around. But you know, it's part of living out here. It's never happened to me either. I've never been bit or never even had a close call. And you know, normally when I'm working out in the pasture in the summer, you know, we wear snake boots out there. But this was November.
Yeah,
You know, like we didn't. I wasn't even thinking about snakes,
yeah,
and it was cold. Like I don't even know why this guy was out. So, but it was some bad luck involved, and you know, that's kind of thing happens. Hell, I got sprayed by that crop duster that
oh, I
summer too,
forgot
you know?
that. That
So,
was dumb. I was like,
yeah,
what?
yeah. I was
Uh,
out running, I was doing a road run. I was probably 4 or 5 miles from the house, and a crop duster spraying, you know, for the mesquite trees didn't see me and like totally just flew right over me and sprayed me with diesel and pesticide. It was really nice.
yeah, super nice. Would be nice for anybody. And then you have a pretty decent dose of asthma, so that, I'm sure that
Yeah.
was really great for you.
Yeah, that's been fun.
Man. So you're killing it, very honestly. Like, especially with your background and all the things. Um, what's coming up this year? And like, what are we looking at? And what are the big races you want to do? And what's in the future? Like, what's on the docket?
Right. Well, I think you know, I've gotten my first 200 milers under my belt. I think after running an ultra at kind of all the traditional distances up to 100 mile, I think I'm definitely more interested in running 100 milers. I think I'm going to be more competitive in that distance and everything else. So for this year, we're looking to get into a big mountain race. We're running the I'm Tough 100 in Idaho in September. So that'll be
Mhm.
the big race. And then, you know, probably do some more local Texas races. I have a 50 miler that I'm going to run here in May, the Chupacabra, coming up. And then, you know, just kind of see what else comes up throughout the year.
Yeah, man, that makes sense. So, like, if we're looking at I Am Tough, I think that has like 22,000 feet of
Yes,
elevation
yeah.
across 100 miles. Texas is very flat, or at least your area of Texas is very flat.
Very flat.
Um, what are your thoughts on making some elevation happen?
Yeah, you know, I'm kind of I'm kind of lucky where I'm at. You know, we do have some good places on the ranch where I can run hills. But unfortunately, yeah, you're just running kind of the same hill over and over and over again, which gets really old. So you know, as far as training for the elevation, you know, you can probably speak to that better than I can. I think we're looking at a lot of high incline treadmill work and things
Yep.
like that. Yeah, a lot of heat acclimation type training, and you know, with I'm not going to be able to go and train regularly in the mountains, obviously. So, you know, my plan is just to keep my fitness as absolutely high as I can, and you know, kind of use that with the time and do what we can do.
All you can do, man. And I think
Yeah.
that's kind of the point asking. Like, it's just not, you got to work with what you have.
Right.
And if you want to run big mountain races and you're not near mountains and you still want to like get the elevation work in, then we either get to be on a treadmill or find a stair stepper or something. But
Right.
it's what it is. And it doesn't need to be every time, but yeah, it's going to show up for sure.
Oh yeah. Mhm. But I'm excited. I think it'll be really fun to get out and see, you know, some pretty country and do some of these big races. I've always loved the Midwest and having a chance to go out there and run is just amazing. You know, it is it is so amazing to me that I have the opportunity to do this from where I was just a few years ago. And it's really amazing at what's possible. And I'm very thankful for having the opportunity. I mean, and shit, well, I'm very thankful for you. I mean, certainly helped me out in multiple ways.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Um, well, cool, man. I think that's about all I have. Where I know you have like Instagram things that I'm really not the best at. Like, where can people
Yeah,
find
yeah,
you,
yeah.
follow you, etc., all that stuff.
Instagram is at bg.rnnr. I post all my running stuff on there. Actually working on a web page and stuff like that right now that we'll have up soon. But I'll post all that stuff on the Instagram. So
Cool.
definitely give me a follow if you're interested, and feel free to reach out.
Anything else you want to share before we head out?
Yeah, man, I think we're good. I appreciate it, Will.
Awesome. Well, let's stop, hang out for a sec, and thank you everybody for listening. We'll be back soon with another one.